Hello, my name is Scott Powell, and I'm a senior fellow at Discovery Institute. And we're doing a series of videos on China, and we have Bill Perry with us. Bill is an expert on China, having worked there since the 1990s, lived there and worked there, and he has unique insights. Our third segment is going to focus on the strategic threat of China. You know, how have the changes in China under Xi Jinping changed things for the United States? So let's start out with that overview question, and then we'll go on into details.
Again, I think that the important point is to go back to the statement by Mike Pompeo. We did not realize how much they hate us. That is important to understand. In the Clinton administration, all the way even back to Nixon, China was looked upon as a frenemy. In other words, it was a strategic competitor. It was not that much there. And there's a huge fight. Some Chinese will say that was Deng Xiaoping's real potential. He didn't want to look upon the United States as an enemy. And then, and Zhu Rongji certainly didn't. But the problem was, many Chinese will say, no, the Chinese Communist parties list the #1 enemy of China as the United States. Not a friend, not a competitor, an enemy. Friends of mine who've been in a Chinese elementary school will say they're first taught in the first day of school how much they should love their country, love China, by the way, in contrast to what's going on in the US. And then secondly, to hate the United States because it is the #1 enemy of China. And so understanding that this is really, it's no longer a strategic competitor. This is a strategic adversary, enemy. China's intention, true intention, now when I say China, I mean the Chinese Communist Party intention is to bring the United States down. And they want to do it and use a whole different strategies, just not militarily, economically, culturally. They're attacking the United States on many different levels. They're sending in many, one of the Chinese strategies they often use is their people. They have so many people. They swarm into the United States to go to the universities, et cetera. And then it turns out some of them are related to the Chinese military. And remember, my whole point, that China has changed its laws. Everything is open to the Chinese Communist Party. There's no secrets in China. So if you learn stuff here as a Chinese, when you're working in a university, you're learning intellectual property, you're learning about viruses, you're looking about military technology. When you go back to China, the Chinese government expects you to give them all that information that you learned. And that's what's going on. They've come in, they've used their people. They also changed everything. I'll give an example how they attack it. You call the COVID virus the China virus or the Chinese Communist Party virus, and the Chinese government responds something which the progressive media has picked up. That's racism. Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, would say, it's racism. And then by using that, they use that as a way to attack the United States, and the progressive media pick it up. Environmental, another good example. And what happens in the environmental area, we are now going into the Paris Climate Accord, right? We're going to reduce, we stopped the Keystone Pipeline, we're going to stop all fracking on government-run lands. So what's China going to do? First, when we look at a carbon map, Chinese emissions are twice as big. They're by far the highest in the world, twice more than the United States.
And I heard that they're going to build 40 new coal plants this year?
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes. They are intending to increase their energy output. They're basically going to increase their energy output, create coal-fired economic plants. Under the Paris Climate Accord, John Kerry was so intent on getting China in that by the agreement, they don't have to do anything for 40 years. What are the Chinese?
Is it 40 years? They don't?
40 years. It's either 10 to 40, but I think it's 40 years. And by that what that means is they will use this to power their economy while we're cutting ourselves down. What is China's intention? To become the dominant power in the world. They want to become a hegemon. I read that all the time in Chinese English press in China. I couldn't understand the word hegemon. In fact, even some State Department officials, hegemon, what do they mean by that? And what was going on is They want to be not just the dominant power, they want to be the emperor of the world, and everybody kowtows to them. So this is it. And then we have everything, what's going on militarily, too.
Well, Bill, you sure sound like a modern-day Paul Revere, and thank you. Tell us about the military aspect of this strategic threat. How has that been changing? And how quickly, how dramatically, how would you, in terms of force measurement vis-a-vis the United States, how do you assess that?
The State Department, the Department of Defense, puts down as China as the #1 adversary the United States has militarily, and I think it's absolutely true. First, remember, this is not Russia, not the Soviet Union, even Putin. Putin is nothing compared to China. He doesn't have the money. China has the resources, the technology, and the money to do things, and to do things dramatically. And so then they go into the South China Sea, and they say, oh, that's our domain. And the Philippines took China to The Hague, to the International Court. And the International Court came out in favor of Philippines. China doesn't care. It's not, ignore it, doesn't believe it. So now the French, the Germans, the UK are running warships through the South China Sea, plus the United States, to say, this is international waterways, we're going to go through it. Oh, by the way, China now wants to insert control over the water right next to Vietnam and out into Southeast Asia, Thailand, etc. And so they're using all the military assets. They also have attacked India. There have been battle skirmishes in India. They're trying to take islands from Japan. The Japanese military has confrontation with China near the Senkaku Islands to keep them away. They want to take them over. They do it by inches. We take a little. We do this kind of inch thing. And will they, if we push here, will they react? If we push here, will they react? Will they push here, they will react.
Incrementalism.
Incrementals. That's exactly how they do it. I should make one statement. Everybody assumes that China will, ally with Russia and the Soviet Union. I begin to wonder about that because China has already indicated intentions to take over Vladivostok, which is the port in Siberia. They're calling it a Chinese name. And, oh, this is our territory. I would think that Putin should be concerned. I understand. I think that's also why Putin never really wanted to have a fight with the Europeans, because if he did, the Chinese would take the opportunity to invade Siberia. They want land, and there's a lot of empty land right north of China.
I think the next country in the crosshairs of China would be Taiwan. And Taiwan, not only is there historic reconciliation that the Chinese see, but it turns out that Taiwan has an incredible semiconductor business. I mean, they are a major manufacturer of U.S. semiconductor companies. Speak about that and what you think China's intentions are, and how quickly would they move, and under what circumstances would they take weakness as an opportunity to move against Taiwan?
That is the great fear. Many years ago, I worked with a trade lawyer, a young female trade lawyer from Taiwan named Tsai Ing-wen. Ing-wen Tsai is now the president of Taiwan. But the point is, I've had Chinese come to me, and they're afraid. They've got family in Taiwan. They really, truly believe Xi Jinping will use this opportunity to attack Taiwan. Now,
when you say this opportunity, meaning what is
the
Biden
administration?
The Biden opportunity is the opportunity.
You have a very weak president. You can just see that he's got issues. He's a weak president, but he also is compromised because his son took money from China, the Chinese Communist Party. So will he react? I mean, we have a treaty with Taiwan. We're supposed to support them militarily. I'm very worried that because the economy is not doing that well in China, Xi Jinping will look for an opportunity to distract national attention and to attack Taiwan. He went into Hong Kong, but the United States, remember, in Hong Kong, we're not going to get into a land war in Asia in Hong Kong. By the way, the real lesson of Hong Kong was China had done a treaty with the Hong Kong people and the United Kingdom, and basically registered it in the United Nations. But when push came to shove, they just ignored the treaty.
And that treaty, as I remember, went from 1997 to 1947.
Right.
That China, mainland China, was to honor the democracy and the freedom and the free market in Hong Kong. In other words, there would be a 50-year period of a transition.
Right.
And we are now only a little more than 20 years into it, and they've already totally walked away from that treaty?
Well, they walked away more than that.
Violated it, really.
Yeah, a big principle. Deng Xiaoping's principle was one country, two systems. And this is what he negotiated with Margaret Thatcher. One country, two systems. So Hong Kong will be allowed to keep its capitalist system. This was the window to the world. This was it. Xi Jinping cannot let that happen. Remember, he has to take back Hong Kong. Again, the economy is not doing well. He wants to unite the national people. I mean, Mao did it successfully when they went into the Korean War. He had his own weaknesses, but attacking the United States unites the national people in China, ramps up their nationalism. So he goes in and takes over Hong Kong. Now the question is, can he go to Taiwan? But the problem with Taiwan is you've got to cross the sea. It's the problem that Hitler ran into in trying to take over the United Kingdom. Or Napoleon had the same problem. How do you get across the sea? And the United States has big navy, but all these other countries have navies. That's my fear, though, is that Xi Jinping will look upon a weak United States, decide now is the time, and he will attack Taiwan. By the way, you can't do it from about October till March because the storms, et cetera, in the Taiwan Straits. From now until about October is the military time when you basically would try to attack Taiwan. But Taiwan has a lot of its own military assets. I think the whole idea, the strategy has been that Taiwan will hold off the China attack long enough for the United States to get involved. But will the United States get involved? That's the big question.
So when you think about that, and you think about strategic threats and military strategy, the Chinese are well known to follow the teachings of Sun Tzu, who argued that the best way to fight a war is without firing a shot.
Right.
So applying that to the United States, and let's talk about a specific. The Chinese people may not know it, but certainly the Chinese government knows that Biden's son, Hunter, came to China, and that he struck up some deals where China paid Hunter Biden, and we know the family, of the Biden family, were paid rather handsomely for that. How do they view that payment to the Biden family, and what's Chinese attitudes? How do they perceive what we call bribery? Would they perceive that as bribery, and then would they perceive that as having strategic control, if you will?
Well, basically, they do have the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the anti-bribery provisions, do not exist in China.
They don't exist.
Bribery is a way of doing business. The reason why Xi Jinping could have this anti-bribery campaign is because everybody's taking money in China. But the problem is, internationally, they will use it all the time. They will attack a well-known politician to compromise him by going after his family. They will give money to his family. And I had a meeting once, lunch in China with my wife and some of her friends, and one of her friends' father was an elderly economist, very high-level economist from Beijing University. He warned my wife two things. Number one, how could the Chinese Communist Party will never be a friend of the United States. The United States will regret everything they've done with China. But his other thing was, we never thought American politicians could be compromised. Now we know that it's true, they can be. That was during the Obama and Biden administration. And we didn't know this before the election, now we know it after the election. There are 4 Department of Justice investigations against Hunter Biden, one in which he's the target. So we know now, the Justice Department didn't let that information come out, but after the election, we know that. So you compromise him. Now, as I said before, this is where I'm worried about the miscalculation, though. The miscalculation is that the Chinese government will say, Biden's compromised, we can attack Taiwan and nothing will happen. That's not quite sure. But the whole point is the Chinese Communist Party looks upon war as a multifaceted way of attacking. not just military. Sun Tzu's point is the biggest way is to win the battle without fighting. How can we use internal measures to bring down the country? How can we use internal measures to bring down the United States? That's their objective.
Let me ask you, one of the most important internal measures is elections. You know, the authority and the sovereignty of the United States is established by the people, and the people expressed their preferences through elections. Do you think that China had anything to do with the election irregularities in America? And
not just in election irregularities. First, yes, many of my friends, Chinese friends, firmly believe that the Chinese Communist Party was behind the election fraud, and it was mammoth. And I would suggest people listening to this video, oh, it can't be that bad. I would suggest you look at a book by Patrick Byrne, B-Y-R-N-E, called The Deep Rig. The first a third to a half of it is all the evidence of election fraud. And this was the biggest industrial scale election fraud in US history. And this was enormous. And it wasn't just a few affidavits here, or dead people voting or voter rolls. This is much bigger. We have thousands, if not tens of thousands of affidavits of people that were there saying something is going on. And it's not just China. The whole world looked at the United States and realized something went wrong in that election. The United States lost its face because, and as one Chinese friend told my wife, she said, we're rats in China, we're rats. But at least we tell the world we're rats. You in the United States, you call yourself a pigeon, but in reality, you're a rat too. In other words, you're doing exactly the same thing. And Patrick Byrne's point is the people he brought in to support his evidence were people that used to work at the NSA and CIA, experts on election fraud, computer experts, statistics. I mean, we had one time in the same period in the early morning of November 4th, when all of a sudden in all these different Democratic cities, statistically it showed 92% votes for Biden, hundreds of thousands of votes going up, all at the same time, when, by the way, they had told the world they were closed down and no longer counting. And no one wants to get to the bottom of it. Everybody just wants to sweep it under the rug. The media say, not there. And who's behind it? China, the Chinese Communist Party.
So how would China perceive the United States? How do they think about our non-response, our, if you will, our denial? A lot of people are in denial that there was vote fraud.
Right.
You're saying, if I've heard you correctly, that Chinese, it's very obvious and clear to them.
Yeah.
So how do they view the United States? Would they view us as, well, if they're in denial about that, what else are they in denial?
They look upon the United States as weak and compromised.
Weak and compromised.
And so if they can keep this going, the election fraud, I mean, what is the Chinese strategy here? Think about it for a moment. A one-party country, like the Democratic Party was the only one in power, and then we subvert the Democratic Party and turn it into a communist party. Now, how do they do that? Well, in Nevada, just recently, within the last week, the entire Democratic leadership resigned from the Democratic Party and were replaced by Democratic socialists. Remember what Lenin said, the goal of socialism is communism. They are basically, the Chinese are saying, this progressive ideology is our ideology. Mm-hmm. They're going to use this to basically try to take over and destroy the United States if they can, and then they can become the dominant world power.
So you've really made it very clear here, Bill, that China is not just a strategic competitor, not a competitor, but a hardened adversary. So let's close by your sharing with us what you think is how does China see its future? How does it view its future, and what would be a time frame, perhaps, that they would realize that future?
Their objective in the China Dream is 2049. That would be 100 years from the anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party took place in 1949. They want to become the dominant world power by 2049. They're going to continue doing exactly what they're doing now. It worked. Understand, from the Chinese point of view, this was a tremendous victory. This election fraud, playing the games of the U.S. election, was a victory for the Chinese Communist Party. Many Chinese, my wife listens to the radio all the time at night in China, and they're all celebrating. Xi Jinping, at one of the latest big meetings in China, said, now with Trump gone, I can for the first time with Biden, raise my head up and look at everybody like this. He felt the pressure of Trump. Now he realizes that under Biden, China's got more fuel, it's got more things, they get the gas, China's taken off. And so this is going to give them the chance to really move on. But I think the second half we have to ask ourselves is, what about the United States? And the United States has to be, understand it's got to wake up. It has to wake up and really investigate the issue of election fraud. And this goes all the way down to the local and the state level. Will the elections in 2022 and 2024 be free and fair or not? Or will they be marred by fraud, enormous fraud, which is what happened then? Remember something, and I think this is the closing point. What did President Lincoln say in the Gettysburg Address? He said, so that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people will not perish from the earth. With election fraud, the government of the people, by the people, and for the people will perish from the state of from the earth.
Well, it perished last year in last year's election.
Yeah, and with election fraud, it will perish. And this is exactly what Lincoln was warning about, and this is exactly what we're facing.
Well, Bill, I can't thank you enough for sharing your insight. And we are grateful for the audience listening to Bill. He's like a modern Paul Revere. So thank you again, Bill.
Thank you very much.